you know, it's like, well, we're into fitness and health. Like, of course, food's like my main priority besides the workouts. It's like my second priority. So I don't know if he suggests taking it more in a, like your natural tendencies, like before your lifestyle. I don't know how he
No,
suggests.
because I answered that one high priority, and that's when I got the lion.
Yeah, I have high priority for that. And so it must have been something else. Or maybe it's just my ability to fall asleep
Anywhere?
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your
I
ability
mean, I can sleep anywhere, but I can also
your ability
run.
to hibernate.
Yeah. But, you know, also like jet lag, I never get jet lagged.
Yeah.
Like I'm not really tired, you know, anyway. So I thought it was interesting because I did change up some of the question or the answers, and I was a bear every time. So
I like I said in the text, I was like, I wanted you to be a wolf so bad. I was like, 'cause that to me would have been a really interesting talk to like, before we even like, we already kind of collaborated on this. And then all of a sudden we are all the 4 different chronotypes.
yeah.
Like, that's actually super interesting that we would all like be just by the luck of the draw, but
Yeah.
you screwed up and be a bear. Way to go.
I want to see
way to be like the other 55% of the world.
I know. I want to see what his like the other videos are for the wolf and the bear and the other ones too, because I'm just interested to hear what he says. Because some of the stuff he was saying during the bear, I was like, that is not me at all. But that's what happened. That's what came up. So as like I said, that's why I thought that maybe one of the questions that I answered must have been an automatic bear.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think that a whole lot of it applied to me, but the test showed what the test showed. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, I was just telling Jesse before you guys got on. I was like, this is bullcrap because my wife took it and she was a bear, and the bear video is like 4 minutes long, right? Like, and it kind of explains everything. And then the lion one that I got was like 1:30. I'm like, what's this crap? I don't know anything about, like, I was like, yeah, you definitely hit some nails on the head, but like you went in so in depth, talked about like food and like all this stuff. And I was just like, for me, they were just like, you're eager in the morning and you want to get after it. I was like, well, yeah, that explains a lot of people that do this, that are in this industry.
That get up and mess shit up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The dolphin chronotype is literally like mine to the T. My
Yeah.
sleep pattern is that I wake up feeling unrefreshed and I'm tired until late morning. And then I suddenly hit my stride, which is true. And then try to take naps to catch up on sleep, but it never happens. That's pretty much me. Just always in a lull. I wake up unrefreshed, but then probably like 10 o'clock, I'm ready to go. 10 a.m.
You know what now, like, I'm kind of like thinking about, and this might be just like me just kind of just going down a rabbit hole, but
I love rabbit holes. Go.
I wonder if there's a correlation to your chronotype and potentially like your muscle fiber makeup. So like certain people with certain muscle, like genetic makeups within their muscle fibers might be more inclined to sleep in a certain way because for whatever reason. But like, I'm just thinking about like, and this is honestly like this, take this with a grain of salt, because I'm thinking like, all right, cool. I think I'm pretty fast and I think I'm pretty strong. Yeah, damn it, I'm a lion. You know what I mean? Like, but then like, if you think about it too, like bears are strong and like dolphins aren't weak, I guess.
That's crazy to me because dolphins I see like fun and flippy and just
John
like, being playful and having fun. Like that's such an interesting chronotype for him to choose. But
yeah,
I guess
I said that last night. I was like, you guys
it must have to do with the like time that they hunt and their whatever their rhythm is.
Right.
Yeah. Because I'm like, you have these 3 like alpha animals and then a dolphin.
Well, that's probably why I got
it wasn't even like a shark, you know? He just went straight for the dolphin.
Yeah. Well, if there was a shark chronotype, it'd be like never sleeps. You know what I mean? Because like they are swimming. You know what I mean? Even when they sleep, they're swimming. So there must be a small population that would be a shark chronotype.
Yeah, like I don't remember where somebody was talking about it. It's a different guy that talks about sleep, and there's one class that he calls the elite, the sleepless elite. And so these are people that can sleep for 4 hours, 3 hours, and just keep going. Like they stay up all night and they'll work, sleep 3-4 hours, and then they'll go again. And it's like 1 or 2% of the population. I have to look into see who talked about that. But anyways, I thought it was really funny that I was a bear too. I was hoping I was the other one too, Dennis. But
yeah, I was just like, dude, if you're a wolf, this could be a whole like spin-off podcast. Like,
right.
The chronotypes. We'll get the guy. We'll get Dr. Bruce on here and have him just like talk about each one of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah, I would be deeply interested.
But what's it called? So today, if you guys want to get rolling into this, I kind of collected some different pyramids, like we were talking about last time. That this would be a talk that we could do. So I collected some different pyramids. I'll share my screen so that you guys can see them. But what I think the first one I'll share, and then we can just talk about each one, and then bring it full circle, is the one that I had developed for our system and what we do. And then as we go, you can kind of see where I got some of my my ideas from, and then two, we can talk further on each of those individually, talk about some differences that we see, but then also like overwhelming similarities as well. So can you guys all see that?
It's about to, I think.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my internet is a little off right now for whatever reason. So if I bounce out of here, I'll pop on as quickly as I can. But why? All right. So this is the one that I had developed. I actually, oddly enough, this morning I was actually able to talk to Coach Aaron Osmus. He's the head strength and conditioning coach for USC. And you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right. Because Jesse's like frozen right now, and usually when someone's frozen,
like Sornex.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So I was able to talk with him this morning. So this part of the pyramid is a lot very similar to his, almost like it's identical essentially. But what I found interesting was I talked to him this morning, and then I asked him about it. And the funny thing is that while he believes in the pyramid, it was something that was created out of a way to get buy-in.
Right.
So what they did was they put it on T-shirts for the athletes, and then what they would do is within their workouts, they would label some of the areas that, like today, like exercise B1 is a strong foundation lift, and then exercise A1 is a power production lift, and we already got our speed application in before we lifted, and like stuff like that. So I just found that really interesting that like it wasn't created to like show the way he does it, right? It does inherently show how they do it, but it was more created in a way to create buy-in from the athletes so that they can kind of see that there is a rhyme and a reason for everything they do. Now, I also asked him about this part down here, and why I felt the need to kind of incorporate that into mine, and he didn't really have much to say about it, because I think for him it's more of like an unspoken truth that he obviously that's something we have to work on too, but not necessarily needed to be explained to the athletes. And I thought that was just interesting.
Yeah.
And
how old is he?
What's that?
How old is he?
I want to say, and this might be way off, I want to say like mid to upper 40s.
Do you think that could be some old strength coach mentality?
It could very well be. I mean, at least for how they promote it, you know what I mean? Like this stuff right here, like this bottom work capacity, Jennifer, like that's boring, you know? So to put that on a t-shirt might not be like necessary, you know what I mean, to them. So
he works with a lot of like higher level athletes too, not necessarily general population.
Right. And then I kind of asked them to dive a little bit deeper into it with theirs. So again, remember that like theirs is basically from this line up is theirs without the dashes on the outside and the work capacity arrows. But they just talk about like the foundation is their strength work. Like that's the foundation of the house, right? And then their power production is he initially worded it as like the plumbing and the electrical, and to them it's the ability to transfer the force, right? That's your power production, is your ability to transfer force. And then their speed work is such a small part of it. And the big reason why that they wanted to do this was because in Southern California, he explained it as like a lot of the kids are brainwashed into thinking that like agility ladders and all of these things are going to be how you get fast. That like quick feet stuff is how you get fast.
The foot doctor stuff, yeah.
And it's funny that he's just like, it's just a Southern California thing. Like going into this, putting a speed ladder in the sand is not how you're going to get fast, but it's all over the place around here. And kids that don't know better are going to think that, oh, that was a tough workout, I got faster today. And that's not the case. You know what I mean? So I just thought that was really interesting. That was something I wanted to share. And it just kind of happened that I was able to get a hold of him this morning and have a conversation about that. For him, it's more or less like it's giving a visible pyramid to the athletes, and like so that they can understand the system and understand that there's a reason why we do strong foundation, and like there's a reason why we press, squat, and pull, and then there's a reason why we do triple extension lifts, whether it be cleans or box jumps or med ball throws. Like it doesn't matter what we're doing. There's a reason why we're doing it, and then it'll all if it's done properly and taught with proper technique, you're gonna get faster, right? So I thought that was interesting. And so obviously in mine, when we talk about the work capacity part of it, being able to be faster and apply speed. And one thing I was actually thinking about doing is putting a slash here, like a forward slash, and putting sport, so speed sport application, right? Because while a lineman doesn't necessarily need to be quote unquote fast, he does need to be powerful and be able to produce power for their sport, right? So it was something that I played around with, and I might still go back because that's an easy adjustment to ask the marketing department to change, right. Just add sport. But when you think about it, like if your aerobic system is the overarching umbrella to you being able to reach your genetic potential. Like if you have a crap aerobic system, then you're going to get burnt out too early to even be able to do the minimum dosage of speed work or power work or strength work, because your body's going to be too fatigued. You're not going to be able to go into the right energy systems, or not be able to maximally utilize the right energy systems. So I think here's a good place to pause and at least like just kind of express our thoughts on work capacity and just kind of our thoughts that we look through the pyramid. Sorry, I keep looking over. Or you guys can't see me, right? You guys can see the screen.
Oh, we see you too.
No, we can see you.
Oh, okay. Because I keep looking over. So I have like a dual monitor set up now. So I've stepped it up in my life and got 2 monitors. But I think it's a good place to pause and let everyone kind of chime in on their thoughts on just like this initial pyramid, and then we can kind of dive into some of the other ones, because I think there's a lot of cool things in a lot of the other ones that are that we can talk about.
I think it'd be a good idea to also put the sport up on top, because if you're trying to build that buy-in, like just being able for them to visually see that it like applies to their sport directly, then they're going to be more inclined to do it. Because someone who just sees speed application, they're like, oh, okay, whatever, cool. But sport application, then they're more intrigued to kind of push themselves because they know like it's going to directly assist them in the sport.
Yeah, might be like that lineman thing. Like, why does a lineman need to be fast? So if he sees speed at the top of the thing, he might just say, screw it. Why do I need to listen to this whole pyramid? Yeah, but yeah, you give him some speed and sport, and you make it like that's. I think the FMS is like that too, right? The top is sport specific.
Yeah, well, I have that one. We'll talk about that one. I brought that one into the conversation too.
Yeah, no, I like it.
What are your guys's other than like just like this one, like you guys want to expand on and talk about like your guys' ideas of work capacity and just kind of like dive into each section a little bit to kind of give a broader sense of each section before we move on?
Well, I think general physical preparedness and a foundation is a super broad topic. I mean, it's not just work capacity as far as your energy systems. It's, tensile strength of your tendons and ligaments that thicken as you prepare to move into the next phase. You're going to be pressing, squatting, and pulling in that preparedness phase in some fashion. It might be, regressed a bit, but I mean, that's a super broad topic, thus the broad part of the pyramid. But I think it's important to bring that into when you're having this conversation with an athlete, what the heck this means. It's important to bring that factors in.
Right. No, and that's a good point that you make though, Jesse, is that like that work capacity and GPP don't mean just running to get in shape. Like doing complexes of Olympic lifts, like that's a way to increase work capacity, right? Because you're regressed in terms of your load and the movement overall, but doing like a Javorek complex, like you do 4 sets of a Javorek complex, you're going to be out of breath and that's physically demanding. And that is building up that tensile strength, those tendons and ligaments and all these things to be able to handle eventually a max effort clean, which we would put towards the top of the power production speed application area. But that's a good point I think that you bring up though, is it's not just running to get in shape. It's not running 110s. It's not being in shape. I think that's an easy thing to get confused with GPP is while being in shape will help your GPP, it's not only like being aerobically in shape.
So I think
it's like being sure you're mobile enough and everything like that too.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what do you consider GPP?
Yeah, because you can being able to be mobile enough will get you prepared to squat properly or anything like that too. So I do like how general it is, but it also kind of has like a purpose that it's underneath the press, squat, pull, because that's what you're preparing your body to do, is to be able to do those movements properly and safely in order to build as much strength,
Right. And I would tend to think too that some foundational level and not to overutilize the term, but some foundational level plyometrics like are ways of increasing GPP, like being able to decelerate properly, like taking your own body weight and just learning the technical aspect of decelerating your body. Like that's preparing your body for a full speed cut and plant when you're playing your sport, right? So I think that's a good thing to touch upon though, is that it is a massively broad topic, and you can almost fit any part of training into that as long as it's done correctly. Like you can put circuit training in there, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to like circuit training might not have its way in the weight room, but you can put it in there if it's done properly with the right variables, as well as just teaching the beginner parts of lateral movement, or the beginning parts of the lifts, the foundational parts, or the most regressed parts of the lift. So I think it's so broad that you're almost able to take any part of the pyramid and kind of insert it in there, but it's just not the most maximally optimized level of each of those. That makes sense.
So what would you consider general physical preparedness? Like what all could you lump in there? Is it just work capacity? Was your original vision to see that base of the pyramid expand, or could it be anything else? Like John was saying, could be mobility, like nutrition is general physical preparedness. Power to weight ratio, stuff like that could be general physical preparedness.
So the way I'm anticipating explaining this is that like nutrition, recovery, those things are like mobility, nutrition, and recovery. Let's say like recovery modalities and sleep are the lines in between the pyramid. That those are the things that hold the pyramid together.
Order. I like that.
Order. Like if you're not mobile, if you're not eating right, if you're not like that top block's gonna slide right off. You know what I mean? That one gust of wind and that top part's off. You know what I mean? Or it's off, and you're now a sphinx without a nose. You know what I mean? And that's the way I think I'm gonna anticipate explaining it. But you make a good point though too, that like that the GPP is essentially the mortar. You know what I mean? Depending on how you define GPP. You know what I mean? I think it's easier to for an athlete to understand that like GPP is just as simple as being in shape. You know what I mean? From a collegiate athlete standpoint, to go into all of these things, they're gonna be like, "Whoa, coach, that's information overload." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
But in our minds, realistically, GPP can be whatever you need it to be, depending on your clientele, depending on who you're working with, and their potential genetic ceiling. You know what I mean? Like if you're working with a professional athlete, their GPP is going to be vastly different than the general public, right? And while there might be some crossover and some similarities, the level of GPP that they'll need is immensely higher, I would go to say.
So then looking at your pyramid, is their general PPP, their wide general PPP that makes them so good?
Yeah.
Pretty much, right? You can look at it both ways.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like it, man. Super.
So yeah, that's the overall theme of that. And so we'll move on to the next one. And so I think I have to stop share and then reshare another screen.
Oh, we lost one.
Go off task too much, but when you were speaking with the coach, did he give you any I guess I don't know if ideas, but like what he focuses with speed, like with his athletes? Does he do anything specific, any like specific field work, like sled pushes, sled sprints, drags, anything like that specifically?
We didn't go into that because I think like if I had access to all of it, I would use all of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's so like your speed and agility work and your conditioning work, I think, and even your lifting is so driven by what you have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Like my first purchase that we're gonna buy when it comes to speed development, I'm just gonna buy heavy chains, and we'll just attach heavy chains to a waistband and run with heavy chains. So it is a external resistance, but it's not an overloaded like a sled push would be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But we're still getting external resistance that we have to break inertia and then run with. You know what I mean? And it's a much cheaper version of it than buying a ton of pulling sleds. You know what I mean? But no, we really didn't get into that personally. Now, what we can bring it around to is that also this morning, you guys know that like I've been on those Maryland calls, and this morning's call was actually really, really interesting because we talked about return to play and return to training, and like some takeaways that we need to really focus on. And the way he kind of broke down his speed and plyo development was very interesting. And we can maybe wrap up the conversation with that when we get there, because that's obviously the peak of the pyramid, you know. But what's it called? Well, I'll share this one here. This one I got from Virginia Tech. And what you can see is now I added in, see, this is where I got that base, right? So this one looks very similar to mine without the logos, or without the little guys.
Mm-hmm.
But they, I think, emphasize that work capacity and that GPP as a massive part of what they do. That if we're not prepared to handle a moderate effort back squat, then we're not going to be able to even worry about power production at a loaded level, other than just body weight. You know what I mean? And then sprinting isn't going to be optimized, right? I think the one thing that could get confusing with this is that, like, you don't need to have like all of one of the foundations checked off before you can move to another. You can work kind of simultaneously within them, but what we're talking about is optimizing each level to get to that higher peak. You can work on speed if you're not crazy strong yet, right? But we're not going to be able to optimize our speed unless we're able to produce maximal force into the ground. And that doesn't come until we get strong, right? So, which is where I was really intrigued when Scott, you brought up the branch or the tree, right? Like you can still you can go off in all these pathways as long as your foundation.
Kind of high, right?
What's that?
You can get kind of high, but not all the way.
Right. Yeah. And then like you can always kind of regroup and rebranch out, rebranch out. And then eventually you have a thicker, higher, taller tree overall. Now, in terms of explaining that to an athlete and putting that into a visual format, I think would be exhausting, right, to the eye. And this is much simpler on the eye, and it's much a more simple concept. But it kind of goes to the point that I just made, that like you can work between the four different areas of the pyramid simultaneously, but it's just where your focus is during whatever part of training you're in, and how you optimize each level will differ depending on how well you can optimize the one below it.
Right. And I think you're right. And you can be working on every level at any time in the year, and you should be. But it's also true that the further you are away from season, the more you're going to be working on the lower part of the pyramid and then working your way towards.
Right.
I mean, every periodization program model you've seen has some sort of, cycles where you start with anatomical adaptation and hypertrophy, which are all part of that GPP, work into the power phase and speed phase.
Right. And then, and realistically, you can kind of flip the pyramid to the side, right? And your off season is where the biggest, most broadest part of the pyramid is going to be. And as you get closer to the season and preseason, that's where it starts to peak, and that's a good point too, Jesse, that you bring up. You can, like, when we're in winter conditioning for football, am I gonna work aspects of speed? Sure, absolutely, because that's my time to teach them how to run properly and then be able to translate the technical aspect of sprinting to actually sprinting. But the focus isn't there, and our work in the weight room isn't necessarily as power and speed driven. It's more hypertrophy and strength driven when we're in the winter phase. And then as we go through the summer, we'll start dropping off on some of the in terms of the loaded hypertrophy work. Like that's where I think like your accessories and your bodybuilding lifts can take more of a precedence in terms of still being able to build some muscle mass, but now your lifts are more inclined to be power and speed developers as you get closer to the season, and then you utilize your accessories later in the lift to just keep that mass on and or put a little bit more mass on. Thoughts on any of that, guys?
I mean, this is kind of like, we do kind of like do all of it together when we are training our athletes, just because for us in the private sector, not all of our kids will be showing up every week for a whole year. You know, they always have different packages and everything. So being able to build on all of that simultaneously, still having a big focus on the GPP, but also incorporating everything else that we can to kind of get them to improve in all aspects, is kind of how we do it, that is kind of how we base each day, is that triangle where we do like the warm up, the mobility, the prep and everything like that. We do touch on speed, the strength, the power, triple extension work, and the main lifts, but we kind of have to change it up a little bit, where instead of doing more of an annual plan, like we have like really tiny microcycles where we're working on daily, because we may have kids that don't stay on for some strange reason after a couple months, where if I do, okay, cool, I have you for 3 months because that's the package you signed up for initially. I write out this huge, awesome 3 or 6 month plan. They don't, for some reason, carry on after 3 months, and we want to make sure they're getting everything they can. But I think just as a rule of thumb, every strength coach should be doing that as like the GPP should be the main focus, because then it'll translate over to everything.
Right. And I don't know. I think when I brought this up last time, none of you said you read it, but The System, the book, The System. So in that, Coach Parker and Coach Vermeil and Coach Rob Panarillo, I just like open my drawer because it's right there. But they talk about that we're doing athletes a disservice if you're only focusing on one area. Now, that being said, you're like how Jesse said, there's going to be certain parts of the year that one of them is a primary focus.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we get rid of the other ones. So when we're getting towards the season, right, we're getting close to the preseason and in-season work. We don't want, let's just take football because it's one of the easiest ones to follow model-wise and season-wise. You don't want your players to get small because we've lost all the hypertrophy work, right? Like their size is still important to being able to play the game the way they play. So while you're focusing on power, the volume and the rep ranges aren't going to elicit a hypertrophic response, right? A growth response in the body. But that's where your accessory work has to kind of take over for that. And like you said, John, like coaches that are looking at it on a even if it's a small microcycles or mesocycle to mesocycle or an annual plan, if you're not planning for to be able to touch upon all of those within any type of anywhere you are in, whether it's the first week of the off season or a week before in season, then you're doing them a disservice, because by you focusing on one, making one the only focus, then you're going to lose all other aspects, and losing those other aspects will inherently not allow you to achieve the maximal result in one of those aspects, because all of them work so well together. Like we talk about GPP, the wider the base, the taller the pyramid. Well, if we completely get rid of any type of conditioning, then we're not going to be as fast and as powerful as what we could be, even in season. Now, we don't necessarily have to take care of the conditioning part in season, because playing the game and practicing on a daily basis takes care of the conditioning part of it, right? So we can rely less heavily on it in terms of what we do away from the field. But I think that's a good point though that you make, is that, I mean, you always have to touch on it, right? No matter if if you're private sector or in the collegiate or high school or even professional range, right? Like when you're working with athletes, all of it has to be important because all of them are the reason why each of them can be optimized, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. If something's important, you got to do it year round.
Right.
Right. And so, but then it's about prioritizing what's important for that phase of training.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Still might be doing power, even though your power phase isn't here yet, but you're working on jump technique, deceleration, basic regressions on the Olympic lifts, those types of things. And then as you move into your power phase, then you're doing those things more often or prioritizing the lifts.
Right. No, yeah. And the way that they do it in the system is that's where their undulations come into play. And while they're undulating, they undulate cycles, weeks, and days. They're all so it's a three-way undulation if you look across a yearly plan. And this allows for, if it's a higher volume week, then we're going to get more of a hypertrophy response than we would any other type of response. But we need to make sure we still get that, even if we're in a low volume cycle, we're still having high volume days to elicit that response, so that way we're never 100% losing that muscle mass, or 100% losing the power production, or 100% losing the speed development and all these aspects, or the strength. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think, Jesse, saying that, like, it's about prioritizing correctly and never dropping any one of them, but prioritizing.
Right.
Yeah, I think that looking at it, it's pretty much, you're always working on the whole pyramid, right? It's not a training cycle that you hit the bottom one for 4 months and then the middle one for 4 months or 4 weeks or whatever. And then this, you're always working on that whole pyramid during different cycles of training, right? Is that what you guys are doing? I got booted. My internet went down, so I had to get back on.
Yeah.
That's why I've been moving around. I'm trying to find the right spot for internet.
Yeah, it completely dropped it. I thought we all got booted, but I had to connect it to my hotspot. But anyway.
No, but yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about. We kind of went a little bit further detail on how you're always working on all of it at once. But it's just your focus, your overwhelming focus might be in one of those areas depending on where you're at.
Right.
Dennis, could you put the Virginia Tech one up again?
Yeah.
So something that struck me while that was up is like order of operations when you're training is actually the opposite. You don't start at the bottom.
Yeah.
Start at the top. Right. Yeah. You work your speed, you work your power, you work your strength, and then you do your conditioning. If you're doing all your work all in the same workout, that's the order you're going to do it.
Right.
So I think that's interesting that that's your order, but your priority might be different.
Yeah.
Right. So, if your priority is GPP, you might get there faster, but if you're doing speed work, and you should be doing speed and power work, you're still going to do it first, but you might get to the GPP quicker, or your volume might be higher through the strength phase to bring some of that GPP up into the strength.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, is that when you're saying that, I kind of was thinking like a river, it's all flowing. It all eventually flows into the GPP.
Right.
No matter where you're prioritizing, if you're in a heavy speed phase of your speed and power phase of your program, the volume there is obviously going to be higher than in your strength and your GPP phase, but it all eventually gets you your preparedness for being able to produce power and speed correctly across the length of time. So it might be kind of smarter to And I don't know how this visualizes, right? But it might be kind of smarter to say that like the pyramid itself is GPP, right? That everything we're doing is kind of all a part of your overall GPP, and that while your speed work might be a bigger chunk of the pyramid in certain phases, and your strength part might be just a thin sliver, right? And your speed and power take up the majority of it. The whole thing is GPP eventually. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Does that kind of translate well? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we talked around that a little bit when you had yours up there, that, you know, it's all part of it.
Yeah. So one of these other ones that I got a hold of here is the FMS one. So I'll bring that one up.
With that Virginia Tech one, with those arrows, the two pointing out and the one pointing up, how the whole pyramid was growing, was that indicating kind of just that as you grow the base, everything kind of grows too, or is that just me kind of overthinking it?
No, that's exactly what it was, I
Okay.
think.
Well, I think that we got to remember that that pyramid is representing an athlete, not the training cycle, right?
Yeah, that's also a good point too. Is that like
we could break those down during different training cycles and say your speed work is a small portion right now, and you're mostly working on this stuff. But if like you were to actually take that pyramid, right, representing an athlete, and we go through a phase where we work on GPP and strength, so the bottom two, then those would get bigger during that training phase, and then it would make those top two look a little bit smaller, right, the top of the pyramid, and then we would need to change phases, and then we would grow that power phase.
Yeah,
and grow that speed phase, right? So like we got to look at it as the triangle represents the athlete, not, you know, the weight room format or like what you're actually working on at the time, right?
And I think that's a good point too, is every athlete's triangle looks different depending on their sport, depending on their position in the sport, and depending on their training age, right? If I get freshmen coming in, the majority of their pyramid is going to be GPP and strength.
Hopefully.
I don't care how fast and how powerful you are if you're redshirted. You know what I mean? I have a year to worry about how fast we get you. Right now, I want to make sure you move well, you have a decent level of conditioning, and you're able to handle, and you put some size and mass on and do some of the things that you need to as a young athlete, right? And develop that mobility that we need you to have to be able to do the lifts that I want you to be able to do eventually. Like if you can't overhead squat, then we can't snatch you. So now part of your GPP is going to be involving a comfortability overhead to overhead squat, so that way we can snatch, or that way we can clean and jerk, or do some of these lifts that elicit that power production response, right? So I think that's a great point too, is when I have to remember that like every triangle or every pyramid is individualized depending on while you can have you can have a general one that kind of shows everyone where your priorities are and that type of stuff. You could basically break up you could talk to every single athlete and be like, your pyramid actually looks more like this, but your pyramid actually looks more, one of your pyramids might be like this, right? Where you're talking about building the strength out. It's super wide, but short, right? Because we're not ever talking about a perfect isosceles triangle, right? We're talking about, right? Is isosceles triangle?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Sounds right, buddy. It's been a long time.
I said it so confidently, and then I was like, that might not be the right triangle. But like, we're not talking about perfect triangles, right? We're talking about every athlete's triangle is different. You might have an acute triangle, you might have an obtuse, like you might have these triangles that are very, very different, where somebody's genetic potential might have them at a higher peak, but it's not their optimal peak, right? They might be starting with the higher peak because just, you talk about those guys that are quote unquote God-given, right? And those God-given guys that are just fast and that have springs out of the roof, right? They might not be that strong when you put load on their back. They might not be that mobile, but some of those things are like, their immobility and some of their inflexibility might attribute to them being so fast and so strong because they're just a little bit tight. I've read some articles that like talk about that, like some athletes that are really, really fast are always going to be tight no matter what. They're going to be tight because that's what makes them fast. They have that spring, they have that stretch reflex response. So I think that's a good point because some athletes might just have a high peak to start, but it's not their optimal peak. And what we're trying to talk about is optimizing the pyramid, not just allowing the athlete to kind of fall into the pyramid that we think they needed to be. We need them to optimize just the whole thing as holistically
balanced.
So this next one is the FMS one. So we talk about movement fundamentals, right? That's the bottom one where we're talking about mobility, balance, and coordination, right? And then we talk about performance. So they lump my pyramid into just one part of their pyramid.
Right.
So, and I think that's interesting to look at. Like my pyramid is only the second part of their pyramid, and their peak is the skill, right? Is being able to play the sport and being able to take the mobility fundamentals and the performance and apply it to their given sport.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a cool thing.
Yeah, so I think what is going on with that is that both the base and the peak of this FMS pyramid is implied in your pyramid, in that movement fundamentals are part of your GPP phase, and acquiring the skill to excel at your sport are part of the speed application phase at the top, right? So those are kind of implied in your pyramid, where this is focusing on mobility, stability, balance, coordination in the base, and skill acquisition at the top.
Right, and I think that fits the model though, right? Like that fits the FMS model. Like what the FMS pushes is being able to be mobile and balanced and coordinated, because that's what the FMS test is doing, is showing you how mobile and how coordinated and how flexible and how much balance you have overall. So I think that's another interesting point, is that like you can manipulate these pyramids to fit your scheme, in terms of like that. While my mobility and all those things are within my pyramid, right? They are breaking it out as a chunk because that's what they sell, right?
Right, and also you're a strength coach, so you're not going to be working with them how to shoot properly, how to swim better, and everything like that. That's like that's somebody else's triangle to work on.
Yeah.
You know? So that's why you should. Triangle. Yeah, it's different triangle from you, so.
Yeah, and that's another good point too, is that like realistically we're just trying to build triangles on top of triangles, where at the end of the day my triangle is definitely the bottom, most foundational part of the triangle. Because even when I talk to the athletes, like on recruiting visits and stuff like that, I say it's my job to make you a great athlete.
No matter what sport they play, your triangle is going to be able to apply to everybody universally.
Right.
All universal movements, so that no matter what sport they play, they're going to be able to excel at it.
Yeah, because then I hand you off to the sport coach and I say, here's a better, stronger, less likely to get injured athlete.
Mm-hmm.
You make them a great field hockey player, a great lacrosse player, a great basketball player. So it's your job to take my great pyramid and then put your pyramid on top of it. Take the speed application part of it and then insert your own pyramid. You know
so like a wide receivers coach, his pyramid would probably start with your pyramid smushed into his bottom GPP phase.
Yeah.
Would be the solid foundation. Then he would also build his next 2 tiers or 3 tiers on top of that. And then it would just keep growing from there.
Yeah, exactly. And then like, and again, we talk about individualism. A wide receivers, like you take 2 different wide receivers, their pyramids might look immensely different, right? Like you have one that can take the top off, right? He's the fastest guy, but he can't run a route worth his life. You know what I mean? But then you have a guy who might not be the fastest, but can run really, really crisp routes and can catch the ball well. Those are going to be two different pyramids. Those are going to be two different types of coaching techniques to elevate each of their pyramids to an overall optimal level.
Always goes back to a good coach.
It's all about the Egyptians and pyramids. Aliens, man. Aliens.
So putting the skill at the top of that, I mean, you hear a lot, no strength and conditioning program is worth anything if it can't be applied in the field.
Right.
It's absolutely true. But it's almost too easy to say that because that's exactly what we're doing. We're handing you that athlete that is stronger, faster, more resilient, more powerful. So they play together. I mean, I guess you can't get away from the fact that they play together.
Right, because at the end of the day, if you have somebody that's super fast, just because they're built to be super fast, but they don't know how to cut properly or anything like that, that player is not going to be able to play long because they haven't built those deceleration techniques and the resilience within their ligaments and their joints to be able to make sure they don't get injured. Because if they do get injured, then it doesn't matter how great you can catch a ball, or how great of a route you can run. It doesn't matter because you're on the sideline. You know what I mean? You're not playing.
Right.
So another one that I found really, really interesting was where is it? Oh, this one. So this one I got from the sport specific or sport, I forget what it's called now. Stellar Athletes Athletic Performance. So this one I found really interesting because it's super in depth, right? There's a lot to it, right? But the part I found really interesting is that they talk about progression and regression within it. And I think that we've already kind of addressed it a little bit, but before addressing it, I thought it was just really interesting. But really what they're saying is that you're able to work within all parts of this pyramid. And during certain times of the year, it's okay to regress and it's okay to progress, right? But you're only going to regress if you're in the bottom end of one of the parts of the pyramid. You know what I mean?
That makes a really good point. We talked a little bit about that 3 weeks ago or whatever. We started talking about this.
Yeah.
That, regression is never a bad thing as you work through phases of training and.
Yeah. But the part that I found interesting as well is they talk about it specifically to being an athlete, right? So they talk about an athletic foundation. And without reading into it too much, you don't necessarily know what that means, right? What is an athletic foundation? Is it mobility and being in shape, right? Which is where my mind goes, right? But is there a progression and a regression to that? Like, is there a way to regress mobility further than just becoming mobile?
Regress it.
For me, athletic foundation doesn't describe it as well as the FMS one does, as far as, just the movement foundation.
Right.
If you can't put it all, for me, the base of any of these is we're a human before we're an athlete.
Yeah.
So there has to be human movement. There has to be proper human movement. So for me, it's almost like there's a whole nother level underneath this, which is okay. I mean, they're focusing on what they're focusing on here.
That could be included in their athletic foundation, right?
Right.
An athletic foundation is not somebody who can't touch their toes or squat with good form or do a push or a pull or anything like that. An athletic foundation is somebody who has the basics of landing, properly using their hips, being a moderate moderately explosive, able to control their bodies, change directions well, and then
Right.
then developing that, you're obviously refining it. It's kind of like what we do with kids off, and all we do is practice fundamentals. Like, you're gonna depth drop until it's perfect, right? You're gonna squat until it looks great every time. These kids, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, we're doing real slow, controlled movements so they can ingrain it here, right? They develop that athletic foundation, and then refining it later with power and more in-depth lessons and such too.
You could even look at this like possible training age groups. So like,
Yeah,
just
what I was thinking.
us as an example, our Max Performance 1, our Jumpstart program, would be the athletic foundation. And then our Max Performance 2, the transition period, would be the athleticism refinement, everything like that. And then our college prep would be the very top end. And then also, this is just my perspective of this one, also throwing in the continuous assessments and the testing while they are slowly progressing into the next phase of the next one that they have. So that's like my take on it, is you can look at this as 3 chunks of 3 different levels of training, where you're adding on top of each other, where you might have to regress a little bit, but they're still in 1, 2, or 3 phases.
And I find it really interesting that you mentioned the testing and assessment, because this is the only one that really brought that up, right? And again, it might just fit their model for sale, right? And but if you take notice, where it says assessment and testing, there's 3 arrows pointing in, and that's also the broadest part of the assessment and testing part, right? But as athletes develop more, right, the need for testing becomes less and less, because they're getting closer and closer to that ceiling. So there's no need to continuously test them. Whereas, I mean, when you have a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, you can test them 4 or 5 times in a year, and they're going to get better every time, because neurologically they have created a better movement pattern, and they've recruited more motor units and muscle fibers, and that's why they're better, not because they've actually gotten stronger. They're just able to move better.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting that as you get to that peak, the testing windows get smaller and smaller, because there's no need to test. And this is something that I struggle to get my athletes to understand, is like, I'm going to have, like, we're not there yet with any of our athletes, but I plan to be here long enough to have multiple guys be able to squat over 500 pounds, right? And my cap is going to be 550. I don't care if 550 you could rep out for 10. Cool, move it faster, because that's going to be how we apply it to sport, not being able to slow grind to 700. You know what I mean? Being able to move 550 from a safety standpoint is better for you, but then also from a standpoint of power development and sport application, being able to squat 700 pounds doesn't 100% make you a faster athlete, because those are going to be slower and slower, grindier and grindier reps. We're not powerlifters. We're not barbell sports, right? So that kind of goes along the lines of, as you get closer to that peak, as you get closer to that ceiling, the need for testing is so minimal. And I mean, the only time really that collegiate athletes, the last time they really test, when you talk about football at least, is the combine. And then when do they probably never test ever again from that point on. Maybe conditioning testing.
Conditioning test, yeah.
Conditioning and body composition, right? But not in terms of their 40 or their 5-10-5 or anything like that, because they've reached their ceiling already. And more than likely, they only have a couple more years of optimizing it, and then they're going to just be just in terms of
start to drop off.
Yeah, they're going to start dropping off, and it doesn't matter, right? And that's where sports skills become more and more important, because, I mean, look at a guy like LeBron James, right? When he came into the NBA, his ceiling he's still not reached yet, because he hadn't been able to optimize his strength, right? But as he got older and he started to decline athletically, which him as a declining athlete is still more athletic than all of us combined, right? But he developed more sports skills. He's now able to shoot better. He's now able to read the floor better. He became a better basketball player overall, and that's what's giving him longevity in his career. But he's never ever tested a 1RM or a vertical jump test or anything like that since his NBA combine.
Could also, as far as like regression goes, if we go back to training ages for this too, like when we see the kids hit puberty and grow, and if they grow a little bit outside of their limbs, you know what I mean, they get tight, we start to see some regression, and they still kind of have the movement patterns, but they also could see a pretty huge regression in that when they grow, you know, as far as learning the movements and coordination, big time.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Is like when you guys talk about it, like utilizing it for like your 3 areas of development within like your clientele. That's a good point too. Is that like your 9, 10, 11-year-olds who haven't hit puberty yet, they're gonna look really, really great, and then they might hit a massive growth spurt, and then all of a sudden their numbers are gonna drop because they don't know how to move their new body with that same amount of load. And It's going to take them a little bit to kind of re-ingrain those new movement patterns under new limb lengths and moment arms and all the physics that are incorporated to it as well. But then, John, you kind of created a nice little segue to this last one that I have, and it is right here. So when we talk about training ages, right, this one applies to just sport in general, but I think it fits what we've been talking about this entire time, right? Youth and organized sports, that's where you develop your foundations of being able to play and move and basic human movement within a sport, right? And the coordination and stuff like that. You develop that by learning that, all right, I can't kick a ball this way, because last time I tried to kick the ball this way, I fell. All right, so now I have a problem that I have to solve, and physiologically, I've solved that problem by never kicking the ball that way again, because my body can't handle that with whatever. And then you talk about going into like midget football and organized sport competition and high school, right? You're getting closer and closer to your peak, and for a lot of people, that's where their peak stops, right? Their pyramid looks very different than the next one, right? And then for even more, their pyramid stops there, and very little people get into that yellow part of the pyramid. But if you take it in terms of training ages, I mean, that fits perfectly, right? Like, you're not going to be able to optimize holistically until you get to a certain age, because you're never going to stop growing until you get to a certain age. You're not going to be able to, you don't have the time to develop those sports skills yet in 2 years, right? You might need 3, 4, 5 years to develop those skills and be able to acquire those skills that make you a professional athlete, right? And that's where like you develop those within intercollegiate sports. So I just thought that was really interesting. I saw this one as I was scrolling through a couple of different ones, and it just kind of made sense to me, and it kind of fits the models that we've been talking, right? We've been talking about the foundation, right? Well, you build a foundation in your youth sports and in your high school sports. Like that's when coaches are teaching you the most foundational, basic stuff, right? Here's how you block. Here's how you kick a ball. Here's how you stop a ball. Here's how you field a grounder, right? But then when we get to college, they might touch on those, right? They might regress a little bit when they first get there and make sure they understand how to do it the way the coach wants to do it. But it's a short period of regression, and then they move forward with, all right, well, here's the way we play ball, right? And then this is going to end up hopefully making you a Major League Baseball player, because now you develop skills and the power to be able to hit a ball the right a distance that can clear MLB fences, right? And then when you're at that level, then it's just a small portion of it that, I mean, the differences between professional athletes is so minimal, right? like, because you're all in that top upper echelon. Like, your bottom end and your top end, when you take them in comparison to the rest of the people in the world, are very, very tight, right? It's a very, very narrow correlation. Whereas you add in everyone else in the world, then that begins to widen, and it kind of just fits like everything we've been talking about, in a sense that the sport and speed application is such a narrow window of training, and such a narrow window of what we've been talking about, and that it really comes down to how you've been progressed this entire time to get to your peak.
How do
Right,
you
and I think
feel? Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
I think it's worth noting that the bottom in youth organized sports, they're not doing any serious strength and conditioning per se. They're learning to run and jump, and almost everything they do is general physical preparation. And then as you get into your interscholastic phase, you might start to lift a little bit, start to work on that strength, and then in college, you best believe they're working on speed, power. So I think it's interesting how
It fits the pyramid.
that pyramid kind of you can almost overlay
Yeah.
strength and conditioning pyramid over top.
Yeah, because the only way you become professional is having great sports skills paired with the power and strength and preparedness, right? Because if you can't talk about like tennis, if you can't hit the right shot, right, you're never going to become a professional tennis player or a professional golfer, because that's such a skill dominant thing. But you might be the strongest tennis player to ever play, but that still doesn't mean you're going to be a great tennis player. And it's such a small part of what it's such a small part, but that's why it's at the top too. It's a small part because what we do, it helps you increase that, but it's the top part because that's the only part that's going to take you to that next level.
Right. It's the peak for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. And
The icing on the cake. It's the cherry on top.
I think if we could probably have an hour-long discussion on every analogy that you could potentially use other than a pyramid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how do you feel like this might be a little bit off topic or anything, but if we go back to the FMS triangle or pyramid, how we have the skill on the top above the strength and power and everything, what do you feel about the kids that go out and hit a baseball hours on hours and hours, or throw a ball every single day, but decide to do that as their main source of getting better, opposed to building the strength and correcting the imbalances and everything like that? Because that's going to kind of change up the dynamic of what they should be doing, and then also like making the pyramid smaller, right?
What you
Right. I think
flip that pyramid and show the parents and be like, this is how your son or your daughter is built right now, right on a pyramid that's going to topple over, because they're trying to build a skill at the bottom, which is the icing on the cake, not the bottom of the base.
I've heard Gray Cook present on this before, and he doesn't just have the pyramid that Dennis showed. He has ones that are off balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Straight, exactly what you were talking about. So
Totally
that's what you do if you focus on the top of skill and sport and don't work on the foundation, then the house will crumble. You'll get injured. You're not going to be optimum. So that's absolutely covered with.
Can I put that up on the screen? I have the FMS manual right in front of me.
Do you have it?
Yeah.
Let me make you a what's it called, co-host. Before I do that though, I think it's really, really interesting, John, that you said throw a ball and swing a bat, because I think there are certain sports that are so skill dominant sports that the skill is something that has to be refined to a really, really small level, that it becomes for lack of a better term, an obsession,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, if I don't develop a fourth pitch within my catalog of pitches, then I'm never going to make it to the next level. If all I can throw is a fastball, changeup, and a slider, if I don't have a strong curveball, so now I got to keep throwing to develop that curveball, right?
Yeah. Or you have a kid who weighs 125 pounds, wants to throw 90 miles an hour.
And
To him, he thinks, oh, I'm just going to throw 1,000 times a day. But no, add 100 pounds of body weight, learn to squat better, learn to have mobility. That's where it comes from.
Equals gas, baby. If you got mass, you can throw gas. And unless you're really, really tall. And then you can throw gas just because you have the levers to do so. But I just think it's interesting, too, because you think of a sport like golf, right? That is such a skill-dominant sport that you being able to manipulate a club head is way more important overall than being strong, right? The strongest guy in the world. I'm stronger than every single one of my friends that I golf with, but they outdrive me by a mile because they can hit the ball the right way. But on the flip side of it is if they spend too much time there, then you have guys like obviously Tiger Woods had this late in his career, but knee injuries, right? Low back injuries because they don't know how to set their core properly. And when they manipulate and create that X factor in their swing, they're not able to sustain a stable core through that, right? So I think it's really interesting that I think every sport has a different demand skill-wise that might lend them to thinking that they have to focus on this. And even within that, let's take I keep going back to football because it's the one that has the three most different areas, right, of player. Offensive linemen, right, they're going to think about, all right, I got to get strong. It's going to help me fire off the ball and drive guys back, right? But then you got skill players that could care less about how much they squat, and they'd rather run routes all day and thinking that's what's going to make them a great football player. When in actuality, it's the whole pyramid is what's going to make you a great football player. That every piece of the puzzle has a purpose, right? I'm going to make you a co-host now, so you should be able to share your screen, Scott. But I just think it's interesting you brought up baseball because I think baseball is definitely one of those sports that has that tendency to think that the more I swing the baseball bat, the more I do this, the more I do that, that's what's going to make me a great player. And then all of a sudden they have a torn labrum because they don't even have the right strength to be able to maintain that proper shoulder positioning.
You guys all see that?
It hasn't come up on my screen. It just says screen sharing.
Yeah, it says Pro started screen sharing.
But it didn't work, didn't show. Oh.
No, I don't have it.
Hold on 1 second.
What is it that you brought up?
It's not going to let me do it because I'm going to have to go into my settings and change it to loud. But anyways, they have the over.
It's up now.
It's up now?
Yeah, with the buffer zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up now.
So, that's the optimal performance pyramid that they talk about in the FMS, which we talk about having a good base and all that stuff, which is really great. And I like what they talk about. Then they go into that overpowered situation that you were talking about, Dennis. And I highlighted down here. So this one would be obviously where their performance or their power, their strength is just, overpowers their ability to move or their tight, right?
Yeah.
So, and then down here at the bottom, it says there may not be immediate tangible improvement in performance. As a matter of fact, sport-specific performance and power production may remain the same or even go down slightly as mobility and stability improve. However, it is unlikely that this individual would improve in general power production or sport-specific skill to any large degree without first improving general fundamental basic movement patterns. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and that's what goes along with what you were talking about earlier, like an overpowered athlete.
Yeah.
And how if you correct their movement and their tightnesses, their performance might actually go down. But long term, does it help them stay healthier and less injury prone?
Right. And that's I think the double-edged sword, right?
Right.
Would you rather them be functionally able to move? Because the chances of you becoming a professional athlete are slimmer than you having to go like sit down on your couch and stand up. You know what I mean? So do we err on the side of caution and make them better movers at a potential risk of losing the athletic and power producing abilities? Or do we still keep them powerful, but then when they're done playing, they might have such low back pain and it's unbearable. You know what I mean? Like it's hard as a strength coach, right? Because it's my job to create a great athlete that can go play at a high level. And that's what they want from me too. Like they want that, hey coach, help me do whatever I can to get me to the pros, right? I want to play in the pros. Well, what happens if the pros doesn't happen for you, right? And then all of a sudden you have to be a regular human being that works a desk job and now has such low back pain because you're so tight in your hip flexors and all these things that made you a massively fast and powerful athlete. But now your quality of living is so low.
Right. I think getting athletes to understand that is really, really important because even as an athlete or a strength coach, like it is hard to, like, how can you regress them back to tell them that, hey, it's going to be better in the long run when at the moment their 40 goes from a 4.2 to a 4.8. You know, that's a tough mental thing for an athlete too. When just like, Tiger Woods did it when he switched his swings up, many, many years ago. He was already the best in the world and then he switched his swing. And that would be really hard for an athlete to do, but then he went on again to win multiple championships again. So I think getting the athletes to understand that and to see scope and vision rather than instant gratification is really important too, if you can get them to.
I think also getting them early enough.
Yeah.
To kind of, okay, Timmy's 9 years old and he's going to have a rough couple of months because we're changing his movement patterns. He's not going to be throwing or running as fast. But that's fine for now because the next 10, 20 years, he's going to be a much better athlete. But like Jesse, I'd be interested to see what your idea is since you've been in the collegiate setting where you kind of had 4 years max with a kid, but now with younger kids in the private sector, you kind of mold them differently.
I think when you get them younger, they understand it better. They're a little more patient with it, which is surprising because you would think a younger kid wouldn't be as patient. But I think by the time they make their way into a weight room like mine or yours, John and Scott, by the time they make their way in there, they sort of see the vision and want to see you as the person that's going to guide them through that, which is sort of a self-selecting population. I mean, you get the people that are serious about it.
Right.
So, and I think when they're young like that, one, it's easy to say, this is what we're doing, and they don't really question it much. But then once you get them doing it, you can say, well, here's why we're doing it, or this is what's important about this. And since they're already doing it, they're already kind of with the program, they understand it fairly well. Where by the time they get to college, they just want to do what coach tells them to do and get out. And
and I think that's a point though to make is Scott, when you say when I get them right and I make them go from a 4.2 to a 4.8, I've lost them. I've 100% lost them. They are not buying into anything I'm going to do, and they're going to fight everything. And their coach is going to be pissed off too because they ran a 4.2. That's probably a primary reason as to why they got recruited so highly, right? And they're getting money, right? Scholarship or whatever the case may be. But on the flip side of that, that's why collegiate strength coaches need to I think not be so private, and I think it's starting to open up, but I think a lot of collegiate strength coaches are very private in their information that they put out there in terms of like what they need athletes to have and when they come, like what are the most important things for an athlete to have and work on as a high school athlete or even younger. Because if if I get a guy or a girl that's worked with any one of you guys or another great private sector coach, or even if they have a great high school strength coach, then I'm better off. And it's going to be easier for me to work with them and get them to understand the vision, right? Because they're already in a wide scope thought pattern, right? And thinking about the big picture, not necessarily thinking instant gratification. But I think with strength, especially collegiate strength coaches, and you guys can disagree with me if you guys think otherwise, but I think collegiate strength coaches have the stigma that, like, oh, you're a private sector guy. Like we do things a little bit differently than you guys do. You know what I mean? And I think whilst on some respects that's very true, because you have those internet gurus that are putting guys squatting 300 pounds on a BOSU ball, and I want to smack every single one of them. But then there are really, really great private sector guys that are going to help develop these kids in the right way, so that way when they get to the collegiate level, they're going to be in a developmental phase for a semester, and then they're ready to go, right? And then they're going to be right in there with the elite of the elite, because movement quality wise and understand and competency in movement is so much higher than an athlete that maybe has never seen a weight room or was taught improperly. It's harder for me as a collegiate strength coach, and Jesse, you can attest to this, I'm sure, to take a guy who thought they knew how to clean and make them be able to clean than a guy who just learned how to jump and explode really well and never really cleaned. It's easier to teach that person how to clean than it is to teach somebody who had a crappy strength coach that cleaned like this and has stiff elbows and doesn't have any mobility to get forward, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dennis. Trying to undo a bad learning process is really hard at the collegiate level, because they've become ingrained by that point. So yeah, quality coaches at the high school level make your job so much better. You know, unfortunately, not everybody is quality out there.
Yeah, and I think sharing the information though, like I have athletes. Some of my favorite athletes that come on recruiting visits are ones that either themselves or their parents ask, like, all right, what should we be working on, like, right now? And I love that question, because I immediately say to them, become a great mover. I don't care how strong you are when you come in, because I'm going to regress you anyways. It doesn't matter how strong you are when you come in. But if you come in and you can squat really well and you can hinge really well and you can press really well and you understand competency of movement, then I can take that and I can mold that into a 550-pound squatter, right? That's easy. At making guys strong is easy. But I think we'll wrap this up here, because I think everybody has to get out of here, and we've kind of gone an hour and a half now. But
I enjoy it, man. I looked at the clock. I was like, holy cow, it's already been an hour and a half. Yeah, I do got to get going here in a couple minutes, but
yeah, let's start to wrap it up. But I think, like Jesse, like what you said is I think, just to wrap it up, sharing this information and doing what we're doing right now is extremely important, because we're getting multiple perspectives. We're getting somebody that I was private sector and went to collegiate. I have two guys that have been private, and they have a guy who went from collegiate to private. And the sharing of the information and making sure athletes understand that, hey, look, it doesn't matter how strong you are. If you can't move worth a damn, then I'm going to regress you when you get to college. And most good strength coaches at the collegiate level are going to do the same. And they're going to be like, look, you squatted 550 pounds, but it was a quarter squat. You can't even squat 225 to depth because you can't even get to depth. And I think sharing the information and making sure athletes understand that quality has to be the first thing, especially when you're young. Because if you develop those good habits at a young age, when they're more patient and they understand that, like, we don't have to go right now. When they get to collegiate, they're like, I got 4 years to make it to the pros, get me there. And that's their only thought process. Whereas when you're 9, yeah, I want to play pro ball, you know what I mean? But like, we got 19 years, or we got 10 more years, buddy. Like, we got plenty of time to worry about pro ball, you know?
I think that's why the pyramids, having that visual is really good too for the young kids. Because if they can start to ingrain that early, that the base is important, then when they get to high school and their coach tells them squat to that egg crate with 500 pounds on it, and it's a 14-year-old female soccer player. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or somebody who's 6'9", squatting to an egg crate this high off the ground. We see a lot in.
Yeah, and they have so much lumbar compensation that now
100%.
their spine is completely blown out.
It's painful to think about and to watch.
Yeah.
But if we get them to understand that stuff early, when the kids start to understand and they start to feel it too, I think that's what we start to see. When we bring them in and we teach them proper movements, the light bulbs go off and they're like, so is that why my back hurts after 100% or 1 RM power cleans, snatches, squats, and front squats all in one day?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
you know?
and cleaning after you front squat and doing it completely in an improper fashion.
So I think getting the kids to understand is really, really important. Getting them early.
Yeah, I think John, you kind of alluded to this, but I think it'd be potentially like, and obviously don't take whatever I say and you can take it and throw it away. But I think for you guys, creating a pyramid for what you guys do might be really important for all of you guys, because it does give you that visual. And that's the main reason why I was like, I'm creating this and I'm branding it and I'm making it mine. I don't think I shared this with you guys, but like Jesse's idea earlier, I'll quickly share this. Like Jesse had that idea of making like just a really basic one. Like this is what that turned out to be. This is going to be like the brand of what we do. Like it's just clean, cut, basic, and it's just, but it encompasses everything that I find important. We don't need to know what all those little parts are. We need to just worry about broadening the base. You can have a higher pyramid, and I'll tell you what everything is as we progress you.
You need a little watermark Shippensburg logo in there or something. Give it some color.
Well, actually, I got it created as a watermark, so I can put this on like the screen, like down here, and be on the screen. It'll just be the little pyramid in the corner. So, but I think this is a great conversation. Before we wrap up, who wants to lead next one, just so that they know what to study or study?
Either John or I, or us both.
Cool.
You want to present as maximize potential?
Yeah, we'll collab something.
Yeah. Cool.
We have all right, we'll go back and forth in the text chain and see what we want to cover.